Hello and welcome back to Cisco Knowledge Base. This is Zach from Content Security Team. Today we'll cover a new topic that the new functionality will be added to support virtual appliances such as web security appliance, email security appliance, and security management appliance. So this video will cover steps to deploy async OS in a virtual environment. That would be Red Hat Enterprise Linux KVM, which is a kernel-based virtual machine using the Work Manager. So these deployment would be for virtual wSA, virtual ESA, and SMA on the Red Hat Enterprise Hypervisor. Version for virtual wSA would be 8.6.x build, and then for ESA and SMA would be 9.0 and possibly change before the release along those lines. So what this functionality will give us ability. This will provide an ability to run these virtual appliances on a Linux KVM, which is a kernel-based virtual machine. It runs on the hypervisor itself. And currently these products are virtualized only in the VMware ESXi hypervisor, which is 100% supported on the UCS C-Series chassis. And that will expand our ability to deploy these products other than ESXi's hypervisors. So what are the steps are involved? So very first on top of the page is step 1, where we talk about what are the hardware and software requirements are, and how to download the image, burn the CD, and get the server installation. So on the very first link, I have open up in the browser here. So this Red Hat Access page will provide you to get started on looking at the very first thing is a system requirement. What is it required on the hardware level, memory, and the hard disk space-wise. Once that is complete, download the software, making a bootable disk. And these are the screenshots actually will walk through what would look like when you are deploying this or booting up for the first time using a bootable CD for Red Hat Enterprise 7.0 Linux. And it walks through the whole deployment process. In addition, I want to point out there is a video from the Red Hat engineers that I put together. It walks you through if you have any difficulty deploying it. The second link, it talks about release notes, what they were added, and some additional information, including how you can even try out for 30 or 60 days for evaluation if you don't have a current license. Very useful information. So these first two links covers that one is on step 1 and could be reviewed as needed. Once the server is installed, then it requires to register with the Red Hat backend, and it could be done through the command line or also through the GUI subscription manager, and that will be third tab. So here are the options for registration process. Number 1 here is a subscription manager register. It's a username, and this is the username that account is you created when you would download the software. So this is on the Red Hat portal itself. Once the subscription is done, these are the syntax. It also shows you here. There are a lot of optional parameters, but at least you would need a username and a password, a valid username and password to subscribe and register. And then bullet number 3, which is to make sure your DNS is completely operational. So either we can do an etcresolve.conf file, or the fully qualified domain name should be resolvable. Or in the lab environment, we can do etc host file, and that should work okay too. That takes us to step number 4. These are the software packages that requires to install. There's a yum updates, there's a work manager, top, and so on and so forth. Once these packages are installed successfully, in some cases it will require you to reboot, so come up to restart all the processes needs to have the work manager. Then step number 5 and beyond, I have captured and noted this step-by-step process once the server is standing. So deploying the virtual machine within the work manager or using work manager, step 1, we'll open the work manager through the GUI application system tool, and we go through these process on the server itself, so we can once we create a virtual machine, and then will make much more sense. Step 2, we'll select the VM name and then importing existing disk image. Continuing on, step number 3, we will select the OS type under all OS option, and that would be Unix and FreeBSD 8.x from the drop-downs. Step 5 is just shows that we attach that file when we browse to it. Step 9, so these are some of the requirements that it's even stand today, where 000V virtual appliance requires 4 gig of RAM and 1 core. Conversely, 100, it's 6 gig and 2 cores, and 300V is 8 gig and 4 core. And that's where this configures. So in my example I show here is by looking at this is 100V where 6144 and 2 cores. Then check the customize box, which will require and allow us to do more additional configuration required to be successful here. Step 8, and these are the parameters are critical for this. For IDE disk, we're going to change it to Word IO, and the storage format will be QCOW, which is copy on write. And the word O basically defines the interface and communication between I/O, between the hypervisor and the VM. So that's the virtual I/O eventually. That's what it means. Moving on to step number 9. We'll configure a NIC. On step 8 that we created a NIC card, and with the word I/O, in order to have our M1, P1, and P2 work correctly, so we need a 3 virtual NIC interface configured. So this will be the first one. As we see, we picked a management interface on the NIC, Word IO, and this setting here. Then we'll go ahead and click on Add Hardware, and we add 2 more NIC for P1 and P2. Now the VLAN option is I could be all sitting on same VLAN, like in my example I have a VLAN 483, and then other 2 NICs could be 484, and the third one could be on 485. Or you can all, for testing purpose, you can have all in one VLAN. I believe defaults to VLAN 1. So once step 10 is completed, and then it's going to say installation to boot the VM. Once this comes up, it will show up like these. So I have an ESA test running, and I had a virtual WSA is running, and it will show the CPU usage here on the right hand side of the screen. When you boot up the machine first time, the console display within the Word Manager would look like this, booting from disk, and you'll also see Async OS starting services. And this is a critical. And once this is boots up and pulls in a DHCP address, the rest of the process is exactly the same what we do today with the VMware ESXi Hypervisor. Loading up the license, running the setup wizard, and configuring from that point on. In addition, I added some of the commands that could be useful. So NFS, if you are using the NFS shared storage, that could be very useful. IP table is almost like a firewall, which is in Linux deployment, it's a firewall that if you are working in the lab, you can either turn that services off or stop it, or in a production environment, make sure we have right ports open in order to communicate. For etc host table, subscription manager refresh, this is just an additional command. This is the process that starts the Word Manager, libwordtd, which is the start. And that's what creates the Word Manager process to communicate between the KVM. Supported model. So under KVM, the virtual modules will be the same. Models will be the same as we support today. So as we look at it here in the table, 00V, it requires a 250 gig of disk with a 4 gig RAM, 1 core, 100, 6, and 2. So these models we supported today are the same requirement on the ESXi Hypervisor. This is more a refresher. Then caveat and troubleshooting. Now just bear in mind, and this is not the comprehensive list. This is some of the items that while I was testing and staging and setting it up, did experience and walk through it and thought it was critical to put them in here. But the redhat.com have pretty comprehensive list for troubleshooting, and I have a link included. It will come in up shortly as well. So virtual machine migration, that can be done just like we do today with the vMotion in an ESXi Hypervisor. Basically, you have more than one servers. They are talking to the same or common storage, such as NFS, Fiber Channel, FCOE, iSCSI. It's the same storage. We do a right click on the machine and it just migrates. DNS should be working properly. YUM updates must be done. And the console of a virtual machine viewer is supported only today on Windows, but the VNC can be used on a Mac and other clients or non-Windows users. So there will be no new model introduced, as we mentioned here, and no CLI, no new CLI or GUI commands or changes for that matter. Number 7, there are no VMware tools. So as it stands today, we already know the virtual wSA and ESAs have a VMware tool embedded in the OVF template, and that install. Those are not customable. But in the VMware tool equivalent to KVM, there is no support for VM tool and KVM Hypervisor. Configuration of virtual models on both VMware and KVM will be the same. What does that mean is today, if the machine A is running a code, that machine B is running the same code, I can migrate the config as long as the network parameters are different. So there is no additional migration tool would be needed. The licensing will not be changed as well. That would be the same as we have today. It's an XML file we install, and there's no new feature keys. So new file format, that's what we talked about it earlier, QCOW, it's a copy on write, and it's supported by QEMU, which is the quick emulator. This is a generic and open source virtualized emulator that supports this file type. So number 11 is extremely important. So what this detail here is the currently would be supported on Red Hat Enterprise Linux version 7.0 and above. And then the hardware would be Cisco UCS Blade servers, B200 M3 servers, and everything else would be a best effort. So just like today on the ESXi hypervisor, UCS chassis is 100% support. Any other standalone servers are best effort. So here's the link for common troubleshooting, and I think I have that open. So during the installation or running Word Manager, if we run into an issue, this table comes really handy. If you see some error that pops up on the screen or a console, then we can look at these errors, look at the description, and these are enhanced steps are here that are provided. So there are quite few of them, and I have used it. These are very useful. So I strongly recommend to review these if you run into an issue. Okay. So the note here is the hardware BIOS setting must be enabled. So VT for Intel base and AMD V is for others. So what that means is I have enclosed an output here. If you run this command on the shell of the server, it will give you an output. The output would be like either it will have a VMX in it or SVM in it. So what's that mean? If I see a VMX in the output, it means the information above has Intel-based CPU. And the other one is the AMD V. So if I take this and run on my server, so if I look at the output and I see it's a VMX, and it repeats it, but that's the one we're looking at. It's a VMX. So it means my server, it's an Intel base, and this is one of the Intel server that it's running on currently. So there is also a good wiki page to understand much deeper if need be, and how to enable in the BIOS. There's a lot more information that is needed, but it provides a good background information. Why do we need this BIOS setting? Okay. Last but not least, I added some of the resources, some of the videos on the Red Hat sites that provides pretty extensive detail and other resources. So with that, let's start with the deploying one of the VM on through using the Word Manager, and we'll follow our steps to make sure these are correct and I haven't leave anything out. To do that, so I logged in via the VNC on the Red Hat server. We'll go under, first we go kick off the Work Manager, System Tool, Virtual Machine Manager. I have a few machines in here, but we'll ignore that for a moment. Create a new one, walk through it, and we'll call it, let's create an ESA KVM. And we'll say import disk, forward, and then step 2. Import disk, we browsed it to the location where this file is sitting. So I'm under File System, Root. Here's my file. As you notice, the file type, open. And then step number 3, which it's just a little bit tricky, but first you gotta do a show all options. Once you do that, you gotta go back, and now you see a Unix. And then 8.x and later, forward. This is already used, that's correct, because it's running with another machine. And then we'll go down here. We did this. We pointed to the file. Now we need to move memory. So this is a 000V model, so we need a 4 gig at least. And just 1 core, so that should be sufficient. Step number 7, we gotta check the customize box so we can have some more options in terms of for the NIC cards and the hard disk. So it gives you this option here. Now we are on this screen. So looking at the disk, highlight the disk. So if you look from the top, overview, processor, we just have one that requires. Memory is good. Boot option, leave it to default. The disk. When we come to the disk, expand the advanced option. We're going to pick Word I/O and the storage. So if you look at it here, that the Word I/O and then storage format is different. Let's go apply it, and then to the NIC card. So the NIC card from the default, I have multiple interfaces. The Ethernet 1 has a physical cable connected, so that's my management. I'll change the hypervisor to Word I/O to match the requirement. And as we said before, the Word I/O defines an interface for efficient I/O between the hypervisor and KVM, and this is all virtual. So this is the first NIC card that we have, and we're setting is the host management. Mine is all in the same VLAN. I have not segmented, just to keep things simple. So if it asks you to apply it, we'll go back to the NIC card. And as you remember, in the introduction we said we need for P1 and P2. To do that, in my example, you see that 3 of them, right? To do that, we'll go to the right click and say add hardware. These are the hardwares you can add it, just like on the virtual machine today options on the ESXi hypervisor. We do a network. Same setting, we pick Ethernet 1 again, and Word I/O. We'll say finish. So now we have 2, we need 1 more for the P2 now. So if we look at it, now we have 1, 2, and 3 NICs. And the disk is Word I/O. Right? So that's Word I/O, format, first NIC, second NIC, third NIC. Everything else is an optional. So processor, memory, and the disk NIC cards. So up until this point, we're ready to go. And now we are finished. So we are up to this point here. So when we say finish, this newly created VM is going to try to boot. That's my boot screen. It's booting up. So for the interest of time, I had paused the video while it was booting up so we can take a look at it together. So here is the Word Manager, and this is the machine we just created, vESA KVM. What we'll do is we'll look at the added option and reboot it again. So we highlight this, vESA KVM, open. This bulb is added, but we look at the boot option. We can leave the default, that's what's supposed to be. It's the IDE disk. What we want to check is to make sure if we look at under Advanced option, the disk bus is defaults to IDE. This must be set to vIO. And I do remember I had this problem when I first VM created in the KVM, that it was set back to IDE after applying the changes for whatever reason. So again, this is in a way is a good thing it happened. Once you first boot, just like we saw, it was saying no boot disk. Go back to edit option. You may have to power off the machine. Go back to edit option, look at the IDE disk, expand this advanced option, make sure the disk bus is set to vIO, and then the storage format is also set to QCOW2 in this example. Once you set that, let's see, and say to apply the changes, yes. And now it sets the vIO disk one as opposed to IDE disk. We'll close this out. And so here's one more thing. We're just going to power it on in a sec. We'll click Run and then open the console. And that's where it should see a boot from disk. And then we'll start seeing async OS starting services, and those are the good signs. And the booting from disk, that's definitely a good sign. Again, in time of interest, we don't want to make this boring long videos. So we'll pause this once it's fully powered on. Then we'll come back and show the console login. Basically, at this point, once it boots up, it's going to be the same as the virtual appliances today we support on ESXi Hypervisor. Okay, after a few minutes it's booted completely, as we see on the screen. Just to make it clear, probably a little bit better. We see as a login prompt, and it's going to default the same as today, which is admin, and password is iron port. So once it prompts you for the login, admin and an iron port. And as we see it, the async OS, this is the one that I've been testing with, 9.00 for Cisco C100. We built 900. So it comes up as an email security appliance, and it will give you the exact same message as we do it today with the please run the setup wizard 192.168.42.42 as we see it today. We can also configure the DHCP to pull that IP address properly from the Word Manager on the hypervisor itself, and then load the license and etc. So one thing I wanted to show you here is to, as we see it here, there's another host. This one is a local host, and you see QEMU, the emulator, virtualized emulator. And here's another host that I have it here. So we can connect multiple hosts if we need be through the SSH connection. Once you have a multiple host managing through the same virtual machine manager, we can migrate a machine. So for example, this virtual ESA is running on this host. I can do a right click, click on migrate. If host is properly connected, in my case 172.18.249.107 is not connected. That was just a demo to show. And it gives you an option and several other options under advanced, the connectivity, max downtime, and port. So in the high production environment, this option is extremely useful if we have a multiple Red Hat enterprise servers in a different location that I can manage, and in the time of maintenance window or production outage, I can migrate these virtual machines from one location to another for that duration and avoid any downtime. That's the live CPU that it shows in real time. So this is a very simple virtual machine manager GUI that within the server that applies. So that brings us for the review real quick, and then we'll conclude this. So for review from the top, the new functionality that will be available soon, these 2 steps to deploy async OS and a virtual vSA, virtual ESA, virtual SMA on a Red Hat Enterprise Linux KVM kernel base. And this will be available through the Work Manager that can be deployed. And this functionality provides us to another advantage that in the environment that servers are already deployed in a Linux environment, we can add these packages to create a virtual machine in the KVM. The documentation here it's very straightforward how to download, register, update it, and these are the steps how to deploy it. We went through it: application, system tool, virtual machine manager. Once we start that, give it a name, import a disk, and you can stage that file into the disk file itself. You can import it to the share storage. It could be NFS, could be fiber channel over Ethernet or iSCSI, or simple in the local storage can do the job too. Pick the OS and the version itself, attach the file. Make sure you provide the right memory and the core requirement, otherwise the machine will have trouble powering it on. Once we do all that, we got to customize it. One important part to IDE disk that we saw in an advanced option, it was sitting as an IDE and the first boot did fail. So it's got to be Word.io and then storage format as recommended here. So once we create a first NIC card, I can change it to multiple VLAN base. This is the first VLAN, or you can have all NIC cards in the same VLAN in the lab environment for testing. To add multiple NIC cards, you can just add hardware and provides you the option to add certain network card. And as we said earlier, it requires minimum of 3 and one P1, P2, and different VLANs if need be. Once this is all done, the screen will look like this with the live CPU if it's running. And the boot up screen will be like this. If you get a boot disk failure, make sure we check the disk IDE and the file format as we saw earlier. First boot did fail for us. Some of the useful commands listed here. Supporting model, there's no surprises there. These are the requirements. We do it today on the ESXi hypervisor. Some of the caveats, a couple of things to call out. The file format is different. It's copy on write. It's the quick emulator, and then Red Hat Enterprise Linux Server 7.0 required, and is supported on UCS Blade Servers M3. There's some more documentation to make sure the hardware BIOS virtualization is enabled and more resources. With that, thank you so much for the time. Have a great day, have a great afternoon, and have a great evening. Thank you. See you in another Knowledge Bites. Bye-bye.